Hello and welcome back to the next One Piece review and discussion. We are continuing right along with the Harald extended backstory that we've been given. This certainly was a lot more fleshed out than we were initially intending. We thought it might have just encapsulated the events that transpired within the castle that caused Loki to get the blame for Harold's death. Now that seems so long ago, and we've covered so much already in this sort of flashback that we're still not done. Oda has still got more to tell, and I am trying to understand whether he's building to something and then gonna leave it for another day, or if this is where we're going to get the big reveals of certain places and certain characters. Because again, there is a lot he gives us, a lot more, backstory to certain characters and everything that's happening. It fills out and fleshes a lot more of the story, and he also gives us more questions, which is perfect because I want to see where this goes, and where we're heading now is all being set up for something. And it's questions we've had for a long time that are now finally, even if a little bit, are starting to be answered. So, without further ado, chapter 1158, Rocks versus Harold. And we continue with our first major reveal. We're not even into the chapter yet. Our first major reveal is of Yamato's pilgrimage to the shrine she had visited. So they'd obviously gone to this shrine, this hero that had come from the West Blue but grew up in Ringo and had presumably died, and the shrine was in disrepair. And what we saw was they had rebuilt the shrine here, and in doing so, when they've rebuilt the shrine, the name of the hero is apparent, emblazoned across this wooden like gravestone: Kozuki Moria. Literally in the cover story, we're getting the reveal that likely and probably is Gecko Moria is a member of the Kozuki clan. Like, we knew he had connections when it came to Wano, because there was the whole reason he ended up fighting Kaido and getting hold of Ryuma was probably why there is a gravestone here. He managed to fend off Kaido enough that Kaido had to leave, but also Gecko Moria himself did not come out well after that fight. He may have got Ryuma's body to be able to reanimate, but he himself is just a patchwork dude at this point with all the zombies and stuff. And clearly the people that thought he'd saved everyone didn't realise that, he actually managed to survive, escape, go out to sea, and wanting to build up this zombie army. So, I mean, that was a reveal I wasn't expecting. Really was nuts, but it's nice. It's nice to get this, and like, even if it is just a cover story, whether is Moria's going to come back. There's a potential he joins the Cross Guilds. I think it's the best place to bring him back. Buggy, Mihawk, Crocodile are building this huge army, this huge fleet. Perfect time for, those big hitters to return in the story in that way. But nevertheless, we have other major figures to discuss. So, last we had left off, it was revealed that Shakuyaku had left and is no longer the captain of the Kuja pirates, and it caused this tumultuous uproar from a lot of the pirates, and specifically on Pirate Island They were devastated. They were never going to get the chance to see her again sailing the sea. You know, they were heartbroken. And then all of a sudden, here comes Shaki walking along after the Rocks pirates had just raided some place of they'd done like several raids. There was a whole sort of narration box of how successful they are as pirates, and this was the era of Rocks. But what we saw was Shaki turning up and saying that she wanted to lay low here. Marines are still after her, you know, she's still a pirate at the end of the day. And what she wanted was to set up her first bar. We did see the legendary bar that she had set up on Pirate Island, and some say that this event would absolutely shape the island itself. You know, it's even more monumental than other events, past or present, that have happened on this island. And we saw from all the pirates that are around, all the way up to Rocks himself, were smitten by Shakuyaku, and it became a sort of safe haven. You know, if pirates were to come here, they were allowed safe passage, and it gets mentioned again. You know, this was a safe place for people to attend. And where we ended was the world government calling up Harald and saying, if you want to join the world government, if Elbaf is going to become an affiliate country, you and your giants have to kill Rocks. And that's where it ended. We pick up on the Oro Jackson, the legendary ship of Roger's, and we see Roger is just sulking. He is just not happy here. He's got his straw hat on, he's got his cool coat, and he's just fuming. He's in a bad mood, and everyone's like, what's going on? Like, why is he so upset? You know, we were worried about the Empress, but now she's over on Pirate Island. Like, isn't that great? But it's under Rox's control. Like, we've got to be careful. And during their conversations, Gabon gets Rayleigh like in a little arm lock, and he's like, "Oh, Rayleigh, you know, the captain's mood sort of soured after you had a conversation with him one-on-one. Got anything to reveal?" And Rayleigh's like, "No, I've got nothing to say here." And we have a brief flashback to Rayleigh and Roger having a one-on-one conversation that during their sort of encounter with the Kuja pirates, Rayleigh didn't want to say anything to the crew, but he felt like he needed to say this to Roger. I really like this as a first mate sort of captain vibe. But it turns out that Shaki had given Rayleigh her Vivra card and written on it, "Come and make me yours," or like "come and get me" type like dialogue. And she'd signed it, and Roger was like, "As if you've only just told me this now, like all the way back then you're telling me she was sick on some love thing with you. Like, I thought she stepped down because of health, but really this is the reason. Like, was this during even the battle?" And he was like, "Yeah, no, I was kind of caught off guard, and you know, I didn't really know what to say, like, it's just one of those." And he's like, "Wait, are you not interested?" And he starts like shouting at Rayleigh, and he's like, "Well, I'd be lying if I said I didn't, but I didn't want to because I just don't want to be tied down." And Roger's like, "Well, I want to be." And when I was reading this part, the dynamic that we are getting from Roger here, or the more we're seeing Roger depicted and like Rayleigh and everyone else, we've had certain moments, very specific, blatant moments, where Oda has mirrored Roger and Luffy, Rayleigh, Zoro. You know, we've had those mirrors matchups happen where we see their reflection. You know, Roger and Luffy very specifically, like that very memorable scene where Yamato like clicks it together. But the character or the person we're seeing here is as free and as joyous as Luffy, but in a very different way. Because Roger here is now saying, no, we're going to Pirate Island, we're going to go and save, or we're going to go and plunder the treasure, we're going to go and get Shaki. because pirates live to plunder, and we don't stop until we get the prize. So we're heading there now, and it's a very different sort of vibe. I'm getting to like Luffy going to save someone. Like Luffy does it for a good reason. Roger's got a very different reason in mind, I think, here. So it's nice that we're getting a very different depiction, and it's not just a one for one mirror. Roger does seem still very childish, still very free, like the way he was sulking, very Luffy like. But this reaction to stuff and like him being infatuated by Shaki is something Luffy's never shown before, or I think ever will show in the story, and that's fine because I don't think it would work for the character. But certainly Roger is a little bit older here. He's not a 19-year-old kid, so of course the beautiful Jewel of the Sea is something he's got his eye on, but she very clearly has a thing for Rayleigh. So that's causing a very interesting dynamic between Captain and First Mate. But they head off and are declaring to go and visit the island anyway. But we jump forward to 40 years now, and we are over at Mariegeois again. And we see Garland himself addressing the Gorosei. And they are surprised by his impatience to bring about the next hunt, those games that are held amongst the Celestial Dragons where they cull an island for prizes and stuff. And what is interesting is he's talking to them specifically about a non-affiliated state, a specific island he has been to, where they briefly stopped off at during an assignment they had just completed as a part of the sort of royal families, or he's not part of the Gorosei yet, but he is a part of the God's Knights. So it's very obviously young man here, and he's talking about this place and saying that we offered them the chance to join the world government, but they declined. But while he was there, he did some scouting, he did some like research and spent his time there. They have an abundance of resources, like pretty valuable stuff. But that wasn't the thing that stuck out to Garland. He says there was an outrageous discovery, one that even the Great One would be pleased with. In 2 years' time, the next hunt has to be held at God Valley. And we see Garland's face here, like he is adamant that not only would Ian be pleased at this island, but this has to be where the next hunt is. So there is something else going on at God Valley, something more mysterious, more that we couldn't have comprehended so far, as to why the island is special. And something that Garland is saying, look, you will not believe what I've discovered here, but Eam will definitely want to take notice of it, and it is in your best interest to set up the hunt there in 2 years. So pretty interesting setup here for what we see at the end of the chapter, but clearly we are heading towards what happened at God Valley, which is beautiful. But we arrive over at Pirate Island, where we do see Shaki's rip-off bar. We see the queue is not only out the door, it is along the stretch of the island. Like, this queue goes back miles. Everyone is trying to get in, and we see Shaki is serving and pouring drinks, and this pirate, who is of course infatuated, is saying that they came all the way from the North Blue. And they're asking Shaki, we've heard about this mean stew and all these drinks you serve, like this whiskey. And she's like, oh, well, I'm not personally going to cook it for the likes of you, And they're all still like, oh, how cruel, but, it still makes me so happy that you talk to us. And she's passing around drinks, and we see Rox and his crew are obviously going to get seats here. They're all chatting away, and Shaki is trying to have a one-on-one with Rox and says, oh, the way you're grinning there, one would say that's a nice grin, but you're not smiling for me anymore. And Big Mum steps in like, oh, it's a woman's intuition, that's very scary. You've met someone. So clearly this mysterious woman who is probably going to turn out to be Teacher's mum is now where Rox's admiration is going. So he doesn't care about Shaki anymore. He's not infatuated like the others are. But someone is on the scene now, or within the picture, with Rox. And while they're all toing and froing, in bursts Roger and his crew, saying, "Shaki, we've arrived. We've come for you. It's all we've been waiting for." And we can see she's like, "Oh, great, Roger's here." And we see the clash between Rox and Roger. They're both head to head, like headbutting each other. Like, how many times have I told you about turning up here? This is my island. This is my territory. And he's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Cool it, Porcupine. While we're here in Shaki's bar, it's forbidden to fight, so you can't touch me. And it's like that undisclosed rule of if you are here for Shaki's bar, everyone is safe type deal. And they were like, but wait, wasn't there a huge line outside? And he's like, oh, well, that line went back pretty quickly. Like, I hardly noticed. And everyone is just out cold. Like, they've clearly just fought their way through just to get inside. But Whitebeard gets up. He's like, I'm done with this. It's already too noisy. I'm leaving. And Shaki immediately starts to go all glitzy and glam. And it's like, oh, so where's Ray? And he's like, oh, he's on the ship. He just couldn't bring up the bottle to, show up here. He wasn't feeling well, so he's just having a bit of a nap. And then, obviously, Gloriosa gets in between them and is still very infatuated with Roger, and he's obviously having a back and forth. So her love sickness is still there for Roger, and he's got his eye on Shaki, but Shaki clearly is in love with Rayleigh. And they're all laughing about it. He wants Newgate to join them in drinks, but he's already left. And we jump over to see that Rayleigh is like singing away on the Oro Jackson, just minding his own business, singing about Big Sake. And out of nowhere, Shaki faints. The love sickness is hit her, and everyone freaks out. And we get that dialogue again, that even though these two major players are at odds with each other, in the vicinity or within Shaki's rip-off bar, everyone was granted safe passage, no matter how fierce you were. If you cross paths, you were safe here. But at sea, all bets were off. And we jump over now, like this chapter jumps around a lot, but when we go over to Elbaf, we are down in the realm of the dead, bound in the underworld. And Loki is clutching onto a tree and gets sent flying, like hurtles all the way back over to like mountains. And we can see all the animals are freaking out and we don't know what's going on until we see Harald and Rox absolutely going for it with each other. I mean, full swords, full hacky, conquerors everywhere. They are not holding back here. They are decimating the entire environment. And Rox is like, you got to be kidding me, Harald. Like, are you really a government lapdog now? Like, are you really wrapped around their finger? And he's like, look, I've thought this over. This is really what it's going to come down to. And Rox is like, you are a fool. Like, have you really thought this through? Is this your answer? Like, I thought we were friends. And he's like, whoa, 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 you've got this all wrong. I'm here for my people. Our history, the warriors of Elbaf have always been coated in violence, and I'm here to break those shackles. And, I want to achieve true peace. And the only way to do that is to side with the Whale government. I've seen, he flashes back to all the people who not only has he helped, but have said, long ago our place was attacked by giants, but you're so kind, Harald. And he's constantly being burdened by the sins of just the past generations of giants. And he just wants better. And he's like, look, no matter how foolish they may be, they've got the influence, they're the ones in charge, so this has to happen. And they are constantly just back and forth, like both of them bleeding, both of them standing their ground. And Rox is like, I'm done with you, I'm never going to invite you again. And he's like, I'm a king, I don't need to be invited, I'm going to live for my people and they are going to survive this. I'm not losing this battle. And while the clash carries on, the narrator says, there was no true conclusion to this bout. This unorthodox friendship that came about ended very abruptly, and these two individuals wouldn't now meet for some time until a certain day, a very specific incident that would occur. And we can see Loki, he's reading the paper again, looking out at sea while the narrator's talking about this, and he's over by Ida's bar, and she's like, do you want some juice? And he's like, leave me alone, hag. So clearly he's forming a bit of a connection with Ida, but trying to not show it. And then this chapter jumps to one final place to round us out. This wasn't the place to end, apparently. This was the setup that has been waiting for I don't know how long. 39 years ago, over in the West Blue, just a small island called God Valley, we see a woman pushing a pram with two babies, and they say, wow, look how adorable these babies are. They've got your red hair just like you. And it's like, oh, well, a shame the father's not in the picture, but, we'll all chip in and help. And we don't see what this woman looks like, but we see everyone is, showing support, showing care, big community feel on God Valley. And of course, they say, oh, have you settled on some names for these two little cute babies? And she's like, of course, Shanks and Shamrock. And that's where we end. We see Shanks as a little wee baby, and I've only just clocked when I was rereading through this chapter. Twins, two boys, twins, and God Valley is a mountain that is split down the middle and is like two peaks. Do you know what I mean? I think we're getting a very realistic mirroring of, two twins. So whatever Oda's going for here, it is clearly being set up for some big Destiny-esque reveal. There's something on about this island, there's something on this island, and clearly Garland's done something, had a, whether it was intimate or not, connection with this woman. And here are Shanks and Shamrock. Now, we vaguely know that Shanks ends up in a treasure chest, which is how Roger finds him. There's a brief flashback we've had in the past. It was confirmed in Red as well. Roger found Shanks in a treasure chest and looked after him. If we remember Kuma's backstory about God Valley, there were 6 chests that the games were around. What if Garland is just a sadistic fuck and puts the kids in the chest as part of the prize? And it's like, oh, these kids are actually pretty strong, they're going to be one of the prizes. And Shamrock was won by Garland and goes to train to be a Holy Knight. But obviously when the Roger Rocks and Garp, everyone all shows up and there's this massive clash at God Valley, Roger escapes with a chest that had Shanks in it. Or Shanks somehow ended up in the chest, whether their mother's like, this is the safest place for you to be put in a treasure chest because they're not going to harm the treasure. I don't know. We'll see, but there's no break next week. I keep saying this, but is this where Oda finishes the backstory and goes over now to, current day Elbaf? or are we actually going to see God Valley now? Because is Harald now going to be at God Valley? Is that the incident where they meet? Because it would make sense if, you know, Rox dies at God Valley, that Harald is there with the world government, and, you know, Saturn was there, we saw. It would be very interesting to see if now Kuman side of the story just didn't interact with Harald whatsoever, but Harald actually was there, just on like the other side of the island. It is going to be interesting to see, but we're building to the very big event that is God Valley, and I cannot wait to watch it unfold. But we wrap up there. Thank you so much for watching. I do appreciate it. Let me know what you thought of this chapter, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.